What is happening? J Game Dude here, and there's no way I cannot talk about Suda 5-1. This man is a goddamn legend in terms of the games that he creates, how interesting the direction that he takes with those games, from things like Lollipop Chainsaw, to Shadows of the Damned, to Killer 7, to Killer is Dead, to I could just keep going on and on. But with all of that being said, I love the games that this guy makes. So it's actually interesting that he mentions how gamers are paying too much attention to Metacritic scores. And that's true to some extent. So let's actually jump into it. But just before we do, if you like the types of videos that I make, absolutely hit the like button, subscribe to the channel and comment, because all of those things ultimately do send a happy signal to YouTube to say, hey, to the algorithm to say, hey, I like this stuff. And I think that people who also watch the same stuff that I do, which might be gaming related, might also enjoy this. So that would certainly be appreciated, as that helps proliferate my video across the interwebs and across YouTube to more people's homepages, up next recommendations, and whatever have you. So all of that would certainly be appreciated. Now let's actually jump into and talk about Suda 5-1, who criticizes the games industry's reliance on Metacritic scores, leading to formulaic game design. So Metacritic is definitely an important site for people to kind of gauge scores. It's similar to like how people use IMDb for movies, because I don't think anyone uses the Metacritic scores for movies, if I'm being completely honest. Because I have a friend who actually watches only movies that are at least an 8 out of 10 on IMDb. And then I looked up some of my favorite movies, and realized, hey, some of the best movies, at least personally, that I watched, not necessarily like the most critically acclaimed, but stuff that I very much enjoyed watching, did just barely fall under an 8. And so I just kind of thought to myself, hey, that seems kind of unfair to compare, stuff that is really just Oscar bait compared to stuff that is just fun to watch from a critical's lens or perspective. Hey, it might not be critically the best movie in the world, but it's certainly a great movie to watch if it's a lot of fun. I feel like games are exactly that, except that games aren't usually measured that much on their fun factor sometimes, when you think about like a lot of games that tend to do very, very well. Sure, it might be like more towards like how graphically it looks, the voice acting, but sometimes if you look at, say, a platformer, it might not necessarily do as well on the Metacritics. And I say this knowing that Astrobot did release and is doing very, very bloody well on Metacritic, sitting at, I think it was like a 95, or maybe slightly less than that, but I could be kind of wrong about that. So yeah, so just to kind of read into the actual article itself, Goichi Suda, the president and founder of Grasshopper Manufacturer, Japanese game developer known for No More Heroes, which I think I actually forgot to mention in the beginning of this video. No More Heroes also did quite well on the Metacritics as well, and Killer 7, and yeah, he worked on Resident Evil. Oh, okay, I didn't actually know that. Shadows of the Damned, of course, which is actually getting a remaster. Very, very much looking forward to that. But Suda said that he doesn't put much stock in review scores, and instead prefers to focus his efforts on creating games that he is proud of and believes fans will want to play, rather than chasing trends or trying to appeal to a broader audience. Suda's sentiment is seemingly shared by Mikami, who left Capcom to found Tango Gameworks and is behind, the critical darling Hi-Fi Rush. So pretty much, sort of in this article, just to kind of, sum things up, Suda does say that, like, because people look at, I'm going to use PlayStation exclusives as an example. Quite a lot of very well done PlayStation exclusives are third-person action games. Look at, say, something like the Uncharted series. Those have done very bloody well on Metacritic. Then you look at The Last of Us. Sure, the characters, setting, and story are overall different, but the gameplay is still very much the same. Then you look at, say, something like God of War, third-person action game. Though more so with God of War 2018 and Ragnarok specifically. I'm not going to put in platformers, even though those could technically be considered third-person action games, but platformers I feel like have their own identity in that sense. Days Gone is also a third-person action game, but with zombies and that sort of thing. And then I feel like, sure, there's some elements that you could probably pull apart and put together and be like, this is the safest game that we could probably make in order to try and get some level of critical acclaim rather than making it fun and things along those lines. And I feel like now that as I'm talking about it and making this analogy, it does kind of fall apart, like I said with Astrobot, for example, which is actually quite unique. But I feel like the level of unique and quirk that games like, say for example, Lollipop Chainsaw, Killer 7, and stuff like that, I feel like that's going from incredibly creative to kind of absurdly creative, that I think maybe just a lot of people lack imagination in games that they make. Because don't get me wrong, when it comes to Suda 5-1, his games I absolutely love and will buy and play to the end of time. Whatever he makes, I will buy and play because I love the creativity that he puts in his games. And I think that the same thing can absolutely be said for Mikami himself. I love me my horror games, and Shinji Mikami makes some very bloody good horror games. Sure, you could say that the Evil Within and Evil Within 2 were kind of just lesser versions of stuff that we've had before, but these two games came out at a time where horror games weren't doing particularly well, and the horror games that we were getting were less the PS2 style horror game and more first person horror games that YouTubers were playing and that kind of ultimately became viral hits in their own way, albeit among younger audiences. But it was a shift that wasn't entirely welcome at the time, and so to be able to go back and replay some older PS2 horror games but create a new game with that exact same type of setting was kind of appreciated in that way. Though that being said, we're talking about 2014 here, and not long after we got things like Alien Isolation and things like that, which were very bloody good games, and Resident Evil 7, which is absolutely impeccable and a great return for Resident Evil, especially when Resident Evil 6 back in 2013 was not particularly good, and Resident Evil 5 is the best-selling Resident Evil game, but that was off the success of how good Resident Evil 4 was, and how 5 and 6 lean more into the action-oriented sphere. That all being said, there is a level of imagination around enemy design, character design, game design, story. A sumo wrestler who headbutts bullets is not something that you can just kind of come out with like no context whatsoever. Looking at games like Beautiful Joe make me still realize, where are these really interesting titles that have all this creativity in them? And when I look back at it and I realize it's in the indie game space and not in the AAA space. And that's, I guess, what I'm trying to get at, is that the AAA space very much is lacking the originality. So I feel like everything that Suda 5-1 is saying is true to an extent. I think that everyone in the AAA space is focusing on Metacritic too much, making games as safe as humanly possible, advertisable as possible, in order to ultimately please a parent company that is publicly traded in order to try and make a bunch of money. I feel like ultimately the art is lost from a AAA perspective, but from an indie perspective is still very much there. And that's kind of, I guess, the most important thing he might be trying to get at. And that we're kind of taking some of his words out of context, but he's not entirely wrong in stuff that he's trying to do. And so that's why games by Grasshopper Manufacturer are games I'm going to play. That being said, however, Skateboarding Grim Reaper, that always has a hip-hop backing track, again, is just not something you would see in a AAA game. But it's there in a Suda 5-1 game. So I'm interested to hear what everyone kind of has to say about this. I think that this could be an incredibly polarizing topic depending on how you want to look at it, and I suppose I took it from a very specific point of view, but then kind of started shifting it around just as I was thinking and as I was talking about this, because probably to nobody's surprise, my videos are a little bit all over the place because I don't actually script my videos as I talk about them. No, everything that I'm saying is absolutely off the top of my dome, so it's worth mentioning that, like, hey, if something doesn't quite make as much sense, or if I feel like as if I've kind of like lost a train of thought, there might be a good reason for that half the time. But yeah, let me know what you guys think about all of this in the comments below. Like the video if you liked it, subscribe to the channel, and of course, like, let me know about anything and everything that I've kind of talked about in this video, because I feel like, again, so many ways that you could go about talking about this sort of situation and circumstances surrounding sort of gaming as a whole. I do have my Patreon link in the description below, so if you want to toss a few bucks my way to help support the channel, because I'm definitely not monetized yet, though I hope that I will be at some point in the future. In fact, I don't know if I will ever reach that point, but hey, you know, you never know. So I'll keep uploading every day until that eventually happens, and as I just said, I do upload every day, so I'll see you guys tomorrow.